When we set out down the trace that morning, I was feeling too joyful. It was very strange to be going down Cloud Trace in a motor car. People stopped whatever they were doing in their yards and peered at us. Some were taking water from their barrels at the side of the road, washing clothes or bathing. Some waved or looked puzzled when they recognized me. The car was old and it made a lot of noise over the bumps and the holes in the road. The worst part was that my father kept trying to make conversation with me above the noise. So you like plenty books, eh? Well, we will see what we can do. I have 1 or 2 books myself, you know. He was very impressed with the box of books I had put into the car along with the suitcase. I like a little reading now and then, you know. Although I wasn't so bright as you, I didn't get picked to go to secondary school. I only made it to 7th standard. He kept turning his head to grin at me, and I thought that sooner or later he would turn into someone's barrel. Cloud Chase had never seemed so long, even though I was traveling in a car. It seemed much longer than when I walked out on mornings with the other school children, or when I got a bumpy ride on the bar of Uncle Leroy's bike. I tell you, brother, I say, well, you see what your sister do? She come and she pass her exam for secondary school. Well, you know what you have to do now. You can't let the girls beat you. And with this, he laughed from down in his belly, glancing at me again and again to see if I was enjoying the joke. He was still laughing when he passed Miss Adeline going down the road with the baby. The boy was all dressed up, and I knew she was taking him to the clinic in La Puerta for his regular checkup. She heard the car coming and put out her hand to beg a lift. When she realized we were not going to stop, she paused to shift the baby over to the shoulder where the bag was, and the bag over to the other shoulder. I couldn't even wave at her. I wanted to sink down into the car seat. I could imagine Miss Adeline making her way down the trace, changing around the baby and the bulging bag several times before she got to the main road. There she would wait in the shade of Rampai's shop for a bus, maybe give up after an hour and pay the taxi fare to Junction. Then in Junction wait again for a bus to La Puerta, and we were going to La Puerta. But your Tanti Velma will help you with your lesson. Yes, man, she is the one in the family with education. She was a high school girl too, you know. He glanced over at me again and looked back just in time to swerve away from Mr. Popo's dog, sunning itself in the middle of the trace. He cursed the dog under his breath, then put on his smile again. Yes, man, she is just waiting to measure you up for your uniform. This brightened me a little. I began to feel excited about school again. The government secondary school was the biggest and most modern thing in La Puerta. I used to look at it with awe when I went with Ma and Carlisle to sell the cocoa. It was not one building, but several, and all of them 2 stories high. I looked at the students with awe too, the way they looked over the streets in their plaid uniforms, talking and laughing gaily as if they owned the town. And now I have been given a place at this school. My name was right there in the newspapers, among all the other children who had passed the common entrance exam. Johnson, Laetitia, Christina. It was a Sunday, and Uncle Jemisi was home for the day with Tanti Monica and the children. Pappy right away sent Uncle Leroy out the road to knock on Rampai's side door for a bottle of rum and some sweet drinks. I would be the first one ever, the first one in the family to go to secondary school. Pappy made speech after speech about the new and blessed day that was dawning in the land. The celebration went on until Uncle Jemisi realized that darkness would catch them walking out the trace if they didn't leave in a hurry. By then, even Ma was tipsy, dancing with us one by one. 2 days later, my father appeared out of the blue. He too was bursting with pride. Chapter 2. I had never seen much of my father before this. We spotted him now and then on our trips into La Puerta, and if he saw me, he would call me over and begin to fish in his pocket until he found a dollar bill. He would press the money into my hand and say, "Go and buy snow cone." Sometimes Uncle Leroy got a few days' road work in Junction, and if my father passed that way and saw him, he might give Uncle Leroy $5 for me. One Christmas time he sent a present, $1 in a white and gold dress, and my mother said it must be the Christmas rum in his head. My grandma, did not have a very high opinion of him. Whenever we met him in town, she would grumble all the way back home on the bus, every now and then stopping to suck her teeth loudly. Anyhow, the less said about that man, the better. But before a few minutes had passed, she would begin to grumble again about how he had no conscience and how he would meet his judgment day. She complained that now he was a big supervisor, driving motor car and all, and still couldn't help his child in a decent and proper manner. Snow cone, she said. The child could live on snow cone? And then again, she would stop and chide herself. Look, Wilhelmina Johnson, hush your mouth, less said the better. Leave him to God. Ha! He will meet his judgment. So help me, he will meet it. You can imagine, then, that when my father appeared in front of our house that day, for the first time in many years, my grandmother did not greet him warmly to begin with. He arrived with the back seat of his car full of parcels, which turned out to be presents for me, to reward me for having passed my exam. At first, he just sat out in the car, not knowing what to do, for Ma was standing in the doorway, her 2 hands on her hips, regarding him with a face of stone. He grinned nervously and waved a limp hand. "Good afternoon, Ma Willie." Ma sent Carlyle to invite him in. The other children were only waiting for her to move from the doorway in order to run down the path and swarm all over the car. And quite a swarm we were, for it was August vacation, and in addition to the children who lived here all the time, Ruth and Kenwa, Carlyle, and myself. We had Uncle Leroy's daughter, Carleen, one of Ma's grandchildren, Caroline's little brother, and 2 of Uncle Jemisy's children who had refused to go back to Petitfort with their parents on Sunday. But Ma knew what was in their minds. "All of you find yourself in the backyard," she snapped. "Lacey, you come inside." So the 3 of us sit in the drawing room. Papi and Uncle Leroy were down in the cocoa. My father said he wanted me to come and stay with him and his family in La Puerta. Now that I would be going to school there, he had been walking around with the newspaper in his pocket. He had opened a bottle of whiskey for the fellows on the job. He had shown the big boss my name in the paper and told him that I was his daughter, and the big boss had congratulated him. My father could hardly contain himself. "Ma Willie," he said, "let me do my duty as a father." Ma gave a dry laugh that stayed in her throat, but she knew, as I did, that going to live in the town would make life a lot easier for me. La Puerta meant nearly 2 miles on foot to begin with, and then about 4 miles to Balatar Junction by bus or taxi, and a long bus ride to La Puerta. It would mean leaving home at some ungodly hour on mornings and getting back only just before dark. Also, nobody had yet counted up what it would cost in fares. Uncle Leroy said that I could get a student's bus pass to ride free on the bus, but the buses along this part of the main road were not very regular, so on mornings I would very likely have to take a taxi to Junction. And we didn't have money to pay taxi fare every day of the week. Ma questioned my father closely. What did his wife think of me coming to live there? Did he intend to buy my books and uniform? Would he see to it that I didn't run wild in the town and get myself into trouble like so many of these high school girls nowadays? My father nodded vigorously to everything. Yes, ma Willie, of course, ma Willie. When the interrogation was over, she still didn't give him much of an answer. She told him that we would have to write to my mother first, and I would have to ask my grandfather and my uncles. He left looking a little downcast. Ma told him that Uncle Leroy would bring a message to him at his workplace. Chapter 3. Papi gave another long speech. There comes a time in every man's life, he said, when he repents of the evil he had done. That time was come for my father. He was repenting for his deeds. No man can walk in waywardness for all the days of his life. Uncle Leroy cut in to say that he didn't mind my going to live in La Puerta, as long as I came home on the weekends to clean his bicycle. Papi roared at him to stop making damn jokes. This was not the time for joking. Uncle Leroy wiped the grin off his face and cleared his throat, winking at me. Ma was pretending that she had no opinion on the matter and that she was letting the rest of us decide. But I knew that she had made up her mind even before my mother. Mama Patsy wrote back to say that she approved. It is high time that man do something for the child. If he will help to support her, then maybe I can soon give up mopping the dirty hospital floor and come home to my garden. I am so glad that Lacey got her place in secondary school. It is a weight off my mind, for otherwise I would have to bring her up here to get some education, and that is the last thing I want to do. I wouldn't want to bring a dog in this New York. Ruth and Kenwin had better see about passing their exams too when the time comes, because I don't want to have to send for any of them. Not a child of mine must have to come and live this life. This place they call New York is not fit for people, far less for people's children. So those other two had better study their lessons, for their father is no big shot and cannot help them much. As loving and willing as Kenneth might be, you know that he has little more to his name than the hair on his head and the pants on his backside. I heard from him last week. He told me how he took the children to spend a few days by his mother, and how Mr. Kenwith nearly killed the poor old lady with running about and jumping up on her lap and asking a million questions. And she's so glad to see them that she found the strength to keep up with them. I wrote to Kenneth that he must take them to see her more often, for I don't think Ma Charlotte is long for this world. And they must know her, and she must have the satisfaction of her grandchildren. Lacey can go and live with her father to go to school if he and his wife will treat her good. But if they show her any kind of bad face, she must pack her bundle and go straight back home. I would just have to stay and mop the hospital floor until I see every one of them through. I am posting a barrel soon. Tell Leroy that as soon as it comes, he must take the 2 little dresses to Charlene before they get too small for her. I bought the same size for her and Ruth, but I don't know if they are still neck to neck. These children grow so fast. Lacey must send me a picture of her in her high school uniform. When Uncle Jamesy and Tanty Monica come up again, they were told of my father's offer. They too were glad that he was at least going to do something for me. So it was decided late in August vacation. Uncle Leroy said to me, "But Lacey, you ain't say nothing yet. You want to go?" And I replied, "Well, I tried cleaning your bicycle, Uncle Leroy. I think I go in, yes." The two of us laughing loudly as usual at our own joke.
Ma took me to register at the school. It was even bigger than it seemed before, with long, high buildings ranged one behind the other, and a huge playing field stretching away until it was stopped by bush. There were tables set up in a hall as big as the yard. A loud murmur filled the hall, but nobody in particular seemed to be making any noise. The children waiting with their big people seemed quite cowed, and the big people too seemed nervous and lost. We were directed to a table behind which there sat a man and a woman. The man said hello very pleasantly. The lady did not look up. I thought to myself that she probably couldn't. What with all the weight she carried on her head? She was wearing enormous gold earrings. They could have been little force-ripe oranges attached to her earlobes. She had too much hair for her thin face, and all of it was piled into a large bundle of rolls, stiff as wire, pulled to one side of her head. Her cheeks, her mouth, and her eyelids were plastered in 3 different colors of heavy grease. Her cheeks in red, her mouth in maroon, and her eyelids in greenish blue. We couldn't see the whole of her dress, but it was bright red and very stylish, and she was hung with beads and chains and bangles. "Name?" she asked, the paper in front of her. "Laetitia Johnson." "Name of mother?" "Patsy Johnson." "Name of father?" "Orville Cephas." Now she raised her head for a second to show us a look of disgust. "Address?" I looked up at Ma, and silently we debated the question of what to give as my address. "Address," the woman fumed, when a few seconds had passed. Ma turned to her with the pursed lips face she used when she wanted to remind us of our manners. "Put Schuylkill Trace, but Balatia," she said curtly. The woman sucked her teeth at Ma. "What do you mean, put Schuylkill Trace, Balatia? This is the child's address or not? You people always giving bogus information, and when something happened, nobody knows where to find the parents." "Miss," Ma barked in a terrible voice. "Take it easy, Mrs. Lopez, take it easy," said the man, putting aside the papers he was working on. "Let me help you," and he took the form from her. "Okay, let's see now. You must be Letitia's grandmother." Ma thought out and smiled. "Yes, sir, this is my daughter's child." "And you responsible for her?" "Yes, sir, my name is Mistress Wilhelmina Johnson, and I am responsible for this child." "Right, so your address is Schuylkill Trace, Balatia. That's what we want." The man filled out the whole form. The lady had washed her hands of us and sat with her head propped on her elbow, staring into space. On the bus home, Ma reviewed the events of the day, sometimes aloud, sometimes to herself, when I would only see her shake her head or suck her teeth. Sometimes she smiled to herself. The outing had not been all a trial. After the registration, Ma had visited Macalme in La Puerta. My mother's godmother, Ma could stay in town as long as she pleased, for Uncle Leroy was seeing about lunch for everybody at home. As soon as we arrived, Ma began fretting to Mazeline about the unmannerliness of the woman at the school. "Salop," she said indignantly, "and if you see how it dress up like a damn circus horse." Mazeline said something in patois, and the two of them held their waists and cackled scandalously. Ma soon put the unmannerly woman behind her, and they went on to talk about everything under the sun, switching to patois whenever they had something to say that was not for my ears. All the while, Mazeline puffed away on her pipe. We went out into the yard to admire Mazeline's flower garden. She had the most amazing orchids and anthuriums, and her whole backyard was color and beauty. Ma walked around delightedly, sniffing flowers and gathering cuttings. In her front yard, Mazeline grew ratchets and dasheen bush, which to other people really belonged in our backyard. The dasheen bush grew lawlessly, its big heart-shaped leaves darkening the little space between Mazeline's house and the road. Prickly ratchet plants stood like well-armed guards in their midst. When we went inside, Mazeline served stout with milk, and I was deemed old enough to have some. We sat around the kitchen table and sipped. Ma looked quite relaxed, and Mazeline was only too pleased with her company. "Well, all you spelled in the day? Not so." Marceline urged. Ma looked a little doubtful. Really? Said Marceline. You're always so hurried to run back to your old man in the bush. What's happened? You afraid somebody thieved him? Then she slid into Pat's van with a wicked expression on her face, and again they held their waists and bawled helplessly with laughter. All I could understand was Duke's, which meant sweet. But I heard other people's words which I knew were only for big people conversation, not for children to understand. Marceline had eaten chick nor child nor regret to rankle her old age. I used to say for Zillion belonged to Zillion, and people were so past, so out of order, that they had everything to say about her, and only because from since she was a young girl, they couldn't tell her what to do and what not to do. Late in the afternoon, we set out for home with flowers and plants, a cake Marceline had baked, and a book for me. A present for having passed my exam. It was a book about Marie Curie. Marceline always had something for me when Ma or Mommy Patsy took me to visit her. In her drawing room, there was a beautiful polished bookcase. She said that when she died, I was to have the whole thing, books and all. Ma usually left Marceline's house in a good mood, but today her good humor gave way to indignation every time she remembered the rude old woman. Old Jamet, she would suck her teeth and mutter every now and then, dress up like a damn circus horse. Ma agreed to let my father come for me 1 week before school opened. Uncle Leroy said, however, that I wasn't going anywhere unless I cleaned up my garden. He promised to take care of it for me while I was away, but only if I left it in a good condition. Not one single weed, and all the plants nearly molded. So I got up very early the day before I left to weed and mold. Charlene, Ruth, and Kenwin woke up too and came out with me. It was so early that the chickens were only just stirring in the guava tree, coming to life one by one. Every now and then there would be a little flustering and squawking, and a fowl would suddenly drop out of the tree with a thud, like a breadfruit. It would sit in a daze for a while, then shake its feathers and walk off with its wings raised as if to let in the air of the new day through all its pores. Uncle Leroy was already down in the big garden. He was cutlassing an area to plant out some yam cuttings and planting suckers, and as I worked, I could hear the steady swish of the swiper from down behind the starch mango tree. Uncle Leroy said it was a very good thing that I was going to live somewhere else, for the way that Uncle Leroy said it was a very good thing that I was going to live somewhere else, for the way that Carlyle and I were eating these days, he would have had to plant up the whole of the land in order to feed the two of us. The little children helped with all their might for 10 minutes. They pulled a few weeds and set off to see what Uncle was doing. His daughter Charlene called him Uncle too, like all the other children. They would go and squat at a safe distance from the range of the swiper, among the dogs and puppies who always gathered nearby and asking questions in a steady stream. Uncle would stop working every few minutes to answer until he'd had enough and chased them away. It wasn't long before the children came cheerfully bouncing up the track once more, holding hands like three blind mice, with a train of dogs and puppies behind them. Next they headed for the plum tree to pick all the ripe plums they could reach. I would have to make sure that I visited the tree too before Carlyle came out to clean the pig pen and feed the pigs. The plums were only just coming in, and after Carlyle made his raid, there would be no point in looking for any. After some time, Uncle Leroy came up to inspect my garden. "All right," he said. "How is plantation going? Ready for the big harvest?" Uncle Leroy always made fun of my little plots. He called me the Minister of Agriculture and said he was saving up to buy me a combine harvester for my birthday. I made a face. "But you have to harvest, Farmer Lazy. You have to carry some of your produce for your father." There was not much in my garden that you could call produce. I had planted pigeon peas on Corpus Christi, and they had sprouted and grown very nicely, but they were still just very young plants that would not bear before Christmas. The bhaji and the pumpkin vine were flourishing. There were about three flowers along the pumpkin vine, still sheltering on the leaves. Then I had okras. They were small and misshapen, twisted as if they were in pain, but still they were okras. I could carry okra and bhaji, I said. Uncle Leroy looked doubtful. Okra maybe, but you think those people does eat bhaji? That is poor people food, you know. High class people does eat something named spinach. Is the same thing, but spinach come from America. Bhaji just bush that grow in your backyard. I picked some of my twisted okras, and Uncle Leroy later packed them in a box with other vegetables from the big garden. Some of Ma's sugar cakes and salmon balls, and some big brown eggs, the best kind. Uncle Leroy had said that my garden looked good enough, so I took up the hoe and fork and went to the shed to put them away. A strong smell of coffee was in the air. Ma and Papi were out in the kitchen making breakfast. They were talking in their humming, unhurried way, like a light, steady shower of rain on the roof. All my life, as far back as I could remember, that was how the big people in the house had talked together, especially at nights when we children were already in bed. Ma, Papi, Uncle Leroy, my mother, and Uncle James would sit in the gallery and chat, or they would talk to each other through the partitions. My mother in the big bed with us, Ma and Papi in their bedroom, and the uncles out in the drawing room, for that was where they used to sleep when I was little. Listening to their voices at night always made me pleasantly drowsy, and I would fall asleep cuddled in their conversation. Now as I heard their chatting coming from the kitchen, I felt the same sweet drowsiness come over me, and the word felt good and safe.
The midterm test